You know, usually when we look at a map, we just kind of assume the names printed on the land are, well, permanent, like a birth certificate or something.
Right, yeah, we totally trust the map. We expect geography to just have this fixed identity that exists unconditionally
Yeah.
for itself.
Exactly. You point to a spot on the paper and say, this is what this place is. But then you encounter a place that operates under completely different rules. So, welcome to today's deep dive, everyone.
Thanks for having me back.
Always a pleasure. So today we are looking at a highly complex research file on a specific district in Hong Kong called Tiu Keng Leng. And our mission today is to basically decode a place that acts less like a physical town and more like a cosmic mirror.
A cosmic mirror is a really good way to put it, actually.
Right. It's literally a piece of land that has completely erased its own identity 3 different times.
Yeah, which is an incredibly rare geographic
Yeah.
phenomenon. Just to set the scene for you listening, we are talking about a bay in the southwest corner of Junk Bay, which is surrounded by mountains.
Okay, got it.
But more importantly, the overarching theme we are exploring today is this idea that this piece of land never actually got to be itself. Like throughout history, it has only ever reflected other people's dreams and honestly, other people's tragedies.
Okay, let's unpack this by going back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Like, before the British even leased the new territories in 1898, the first people to actually name this landscape were the Tanka fishermen.
Right, the Tanka.
Yeah, and the Tanka were a traditional water-dwelling people of the South China Sea, and they were, frankly, heavily marginalized.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Mainstream society systematically discriminated against them. I mean, they were forbidden from settling on land, and they couldn't take civil service exams to, improve their station in life.
Wow. So to the official administrative systems of the time, this area just didn't even exist on paper.
Exactly. But to the Tanka, it was home. And they actually named it Chiu Keng Wan.
Which translates to mirror ring or mirror bay.
Yes. Because the circular bay's calm waters looked incredibly still, like a literal mirror reflecting the sky.
But I'm guessing, knowing what we know about this deep dive, that wasn't just a pretty physical description, right?
You'd be right. It was deeply functional in their belief system. So the Tanka cosmology revolved around the worship of Tin Hao, or Mazu, who is the Chinese goddess of the sea.
Right, the protector of fishermen and sailors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in this faith, perfectly still water isn't just, nice to look at. It acts as an oracle, like a medium.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Tanka believed that a perfectly undisturbed water surface was a literal mirror that allowed sea spirits and dragon kings from the depths to actually observe the sky and the heavens above.
So the name Chiu Keng was basically a spiritual anchor. It marked a sacred functional space where the divine could reflect on the world.
Yes. And that harmony is exactly what makes the next phase so jarring. Because, well, that sacred space definitely didn't last. By the early 1900s, colonial capitalism arrives, and it's eager to conquer every single inch of the map.
Right, and enter Alfred Rennie.
Oh, right.
Yeah, this guy. So he's a Canadian businessman. He was previously a representative for the Portland Flouring Mills. And he looks at this quiet, spiritual bay and decides, you know what, I'm going to build a massive flour mill right here.
As you do.
Exactly. And he is not doing this alone. He is backed by colonial elites, like absolute giants of Hong Kong commerce at the time, people like Paul Chater and Hormisji Norji Modi.
Yeah, it was billed as a massive blue-chip industrial project. I mean, a 1908 publication actually described it as the most important industry in East Asia.
That is quite the claim.
Right. So Rennie buys 127 acres, dredges and reclaims the land, and builds his industrial utopia.
Yeah.
But it was a spectacular failure.
So why exactly? How does a project with that much elite backing and money just completely collapse?
Well, the mechanics of the failure came down to sheer logistical reality versus, colonial hubris. The production costs were incredibly high because importing raw wheat all the way across the ocean was just really expensive.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then you have the subtropical climate of Hong Kong. Operating heavy milling machinery in that extreme humidity meant the quality of the flour was highly unstable, and it just spoiled way too quickly.
Oh, yeah. Flour and humidity do not mix well.
No, not at all. They simply couldn't compete with the consistency or the price of imported finished flour. So by April 1908, the mill went completely bankrupt.
And here's where the tragedy really strikes. On April 14th, 1908, Rennie, who is just drowning in debt and completely broken by the failure of his grand vision, he jumps off his private ferry.
A boat ironically named the Canada, by the way.
Right, the Canada. So he jumps off and drowns himself in the nearby Lyman Strait.
which triggers an incredible chain reaction on the map itself.
This is where it gets really interesting to me, because it is like a morbid 20th century game of telephone that permanently altered the geography of the area.
A morbid game of telephone is exactly what it was.
Yeah, rumors started spreading rapidly among the locals. But the rumor wasn't that Rennie drowned in the strait. The rumor was that he hung himself inside the mill.
Right, which completely changes things.
Exactly. Now think back to the original Tanka name for the area, Chiu Keng, which means mirror. But the Cantonese phrase for hanging by the neck is Tiu Keng.
They sound almost exactly the same when spoken aloud. Chiu Keng, Tiu Keng.
So through this tragic, totally false rumor, Chiu Keng morphs into Tiu Keng Leng, hanging a ridge. Suddenly, the land is branded by a suicide.
It's so dark.
It is. And later on, government officials were so embarrassed by this deeply morbid name that they changed the written characters to Tiu Keng, which actually means adjusting scenery.
Right. It sounds the exact same Tiu Keng, but it's a polite, completely empty phrase. Just corporate rebranding, basically.
Yeah, completely. So the Tanka's sacred mirror was completely wiped out and paved over by a Canadian bankruptcy cover-up.
And what's really fascinating here is how this entire sequence of events looks through the lens of traditional feng shui. A contemporary feng shui analysis in our sources points out that this specific land sits on a white tiger position.
Okay, break that down for us. What does a white tiger position actually mean in a physical landscape?
Okay, so imagine the main mountain range running through Kowloon as a massive, energetic dragon vein.
Okay, tracking with you.
In feng shui topography, the white tiger is literally the physical mountain ridge flanking the right side of that main vein.
So it's on the side.
Yeah, and its role is that of a guardian. It is meant to just sit quietly and protect the center. Because of this, it possesses a very weak, passive, floating energy. It is absolutely not an engine.
So trying to build a massive, heavy, generative industrial complex there is.
It's essentially asking a night watchman to run a power plant.
Wow, okay, that puts it in perspective. So it was never going to be the most important industry in East Asia.
Precisely. In this traditional view, Rennie's failure was geographically inevitable. And in local belief systems, the false rumor of an upward hanging creates a powerful, lingering, negative energy, like much more so than a drowning in the sea. The landscape just absorbed this dark mythology. The mirror was shattered.
You know, if you are visiting Hong Kong today, you can actually trace the edges of this first erasure. There's a hidden gem for tourists we found in the research. It's Chiu Keng Wan Shan, or Mirror Ring Mountain.
Oh yeah, the peak.
Yeah, it's a 247-meter peak, and it is the absolutely only place left on the map that still retains that original Tanka name. If you stand up there at noon, you can still see the harsh glare of the water against the modern high-rises. It's a vivid sensory bridge to the past.
And if you want another hidden gem, you can also visit Lyman Seafood Street and look out toward Devil's Peak. That's the specific area where Rennie actually drowned.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if you go in the late spring when the sea fog rolls in, visibility drops, and you just hear the churning engine noise of the boats in the narrow channel, it perfectly recreates the ominous, claustrophobic sensory experience of April 1908.
That is haunting. So with the factory entirely gone and the original name sanitized into an empty shell of adjusting scenery, this land just sat there.
Just completely empty.
Right. Because it had been stripped of its name and its industry, it was effectively a blank slate on the map. And in 1950, the British colonial government desperately needed a blank slate to hide a geopolitical nightmare.
Right. By 1949 and 1950, the Chinese Civil War concludes on the mainland. Hundreds of thousands of defeated nationalist soldiers, the KMT, and their families flee southward into Hong Kong.
And it becomes one of the largest, most sudden refugee influxes in the city's history. And before we get too deep into this, just as a quick note for you listening, because we are getting into the political tensions between the KMT and the Communist Party, we just want to remind you that we are strictly reporting the historical facts from our sources today. We are not taking sides or endorsing any political viewpoints, just exploring the lived reality of this space.
Absolutely. We're just looking at what happened on this specific piece of geography.
Exactly. So the British colonial government was utterly terrified. They had a massive crisis on their hands. If they actively supported or organized these heavily armed, deeply ideological KMT troops, Beijing would view it as a direct hostile provocation.
Which they obviously wanted to avoid.
Right. But if they forced them back across the border, they faced a humanitarian disaster. So the strategy was extreme isolation. In June 1950, they took about 6,000 KMT soldiers, plus up to 20,000 dependents, and essentially just dumped them in this remote, abandoned bay at Tiu Keng Leng.
They practically just threw them out of sight. I mean, the roads were terrible, the infrastructure was practically non-existent, and the local police barely even went in there.
It was completely cut off.
Totally. But the people didn't just give up and fade away. Funded heavily by the Free China Relief Association based over in Taiwan, this refugee camp transformed into a quasi-state right inside British territory.
They essentially built an island within an island. They built their own schools. They flew the blue sky and white sun flag of the Republic of China everywhere.
Everywhere.
And they completely refused to use the standard Gregorian calendar. Every single document, every school assignment was dated using the Republic of China year. So instead of 1950, they were living in ROC year 39.
Which is such a wild detail. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to understand their mindset. They weren't building a permanent home. Banners painted on the doors told residents to prepare for the great task of counterattacking the mainland.
So they were just biding their time.
Yes. They lived in an isolated bubble, purely waiting to go back.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second. Earlier you mentioned the feng shui white tiger concept. The idea that this topographical right arm is just a guardian with a weak passive energy that can never truly build a foundation.
Yes.
You're applying an ancient geographical concept to a 20th century Cold War refugee crisis. I mean, that feels like a massive stretch to me. How can a mountain's energy dictate the fate of 20,000 displaced soldiers?
I know. It sounds like a massive stretch. Until you actually look at the cultural psychology of the people living there, which perfectly matches the landscape.
Okay, how so?
Well, in Chinese history, there's a deep cultural concept of yimin, which means remnant subjects, people who remain stubbornly loyal to a fallen dynasty.
Ah, I see.
These KMT residents were the ultimate 20th century yimin. They were living purely for a tomorrow that might never come, which rendered their today completely temporary.
Right.
Because they thought they were leaving any day, they never truly put down permanent structural roots.
They were just passing through.
Essentially, yeah. They were like packed to suitcases sitting by the door for 40 years.
Okay, when you put it like that, it actually does make sense. The energy of the land couldn't gather because the people themselves refused to gather it.
Exactly. Their true political and spiritual center was hundreds of miles away in Taiwan. Tiu Keng Leng, sitting on that passive white tiger position, was merely guarding a memory of a lost nation.
That is incredibly heavy. And there is a physical, ideological time capsule you can visit today that proves this, speaking of hidden gems for tourists. Hidden right among the modern public housing estates is a 2-story brick building.
Yeah, the dormitory.
Right, it's the last surviving structure of the camp. And right on the front, carved deeply in big characters, it says Republic of China Year 51, which is 1962. If you touch those bricks, which are marked with white sea salt stains from decades of wind, you are literally touching an artifact from an alternate timeline, perfectly preserved by its own isolation.
But a frozen timeline cannot stay frozen forever, especially right in the pressure cooker of the Cold War.
No, definitely not.
That isolation eventually ruptured, and it did so with incredible violence.
Which brings us to the 1956 Double 10th riots. So picture this. It is October 10th, 1956. This is the Double 10th holiday, which is the most important national day of the Republic of China.
Right.
Over at the Leicheng UK estate, which is miles away from Tiu Keng Leng, a low-level housing official decides to enforce a technicality and takes down some paper KMT flags and decorations pasted on the walls.
Just a bureaucratic move.
Yeah. And that single, seemingly mundane administrative act sparks a massive 3-day riot across Hong Kong.
It's hard to even fathom.
But how does a dispute over paper flags escalate into a citywide deadly conflict? I mean, that seems like a huge leap.
It escalated because of the underlying mechanics of a deeply divided city. The housing official taking down the flag wasn't seen as just doing his job. He was viewed by KMT loyalists as an agent of British oppression actively siding with the communists.
So it was instantly politicized.
Instantaneously. Angry crowds immediately gathered demanding apologies. Word spread rapidly. And while Tiu Keng Leng wasn't the direct site of the worst street brawls, it was the organizational heart of the entire movement.
Right, because right-wing triad groups and KMT loyalists across the city looked to Tiu Keng Leng as their untouchable spiritual anchor. That gave them the organizational momentum to mobilize thousands of people in escalating street clashes.
And it was devastating. The city essentially burned for 3 days. 59 people died. Thousands were arrested. But to understand why the violence was so intense, we have to look at the political theology of the camp. In their worldview, the blue sky and white sun flag wasn't just a piece of cloth representing a political party.
It was much more than that.
Exactly, it was a sacred object. And the double tenth wasn't just an anniversary on a calendar, it was a sacred ritual that temporarily brought their lost beloved nation back to life right there in Hong Kong.
So tearing down the flag wasn't an administrative enforcement. It was an act of religious desecration.
Exactly. And this raises a profound point about how we experience spaces of conflict today. The Lei Cheng UK estate, the exact spot where this deadly riot sparked, is now the site of the Lei Cheng UK Han Tomb Museum.
Wait, really?
Yeah. During construction in the 1950s, workers unearthed an ancient Han Dynasty tomb right there. So today, as a tourist, you can visit this bizarre layering of geography. An ancient, silent burial ground, perfectly overlaid with the exact ignition point of a modern political death.
It is surreal to think about standing there. But for the British colonial government, this deadly riot proved that leaving Tiu Keng Leng as a completely autonomous, heavily armed ideological camp was simply too dangerous.
Yeah, they realized they couldn't just ignore it anymore.
They had to integrate it. In 1961, they actually promised the residents indefinite residence to calm tensions. But, history always catches up.
It always does.
Yeah.
In 1984, the Sino-British Joint Declaration was signed, which officially confirmed that Hong Kong would be handed back to China in 1997.
And Beijing made it unequivocally clear that a heavily fortified Republic of China enclave could not and would not exist within its new territory.
No, absolutely not.
So in 1996, despite that 1961 promise of indefinite residence, the government moved in. The final residents were evicted, with most being relocated to Taiwan or given public housing elsewhere.
But they didn't just evict the people. They completely obliterated the space. The thousands of makeshift homes, the schools, the dirt paths, they were completely bulldozed to the ground to make way for a gleaming, modern, new town.
It was the ultimate violent end to their suspended timeline.
And this brings the cosmic cruelty of this geography full circle. Not only was the physical space wiped out, but the history was scrubbed. The English name Rennie's Mill was officially removed from all maps, replaced only by the Cantonese pinyin Tiu Keng Leng.
So they basically erased the erasure.
Yeah, they didn't just destroy the brick buildings, they permanently terminated the Republic of China calendar timeline, and they simultaneously erased the colonial memory of the Western capitalist failure.
There is an incredibly poetic, almost tragic irony here for anyone visiting today. If you go to the slopes of Chiu Keng Wan Mountain now, you will find the Tiu Keng Leng Chinese Permanent Cemetery.
Right.
The exact hillside where living refugees once spent 4 decades staring out at the water waiting to go home is now literally a massive waiting room for the dead. It is chilling.
It is deeply sobering. And if we pull back from the individual tragedies and look at the synthesis of all these eras, we finally arrive at the true identity of Tiu Keng Leng. Traditional historians often view this as just a straightforward story about Cold War refugees or early colonial industry.
Sure, just looking at the surface level events.
But the underlying mechanics reveal a deeper structural truth. This is a masterclass in mirror image political geography.
So what does this all mean for us then?
It means Tiu Keng Leng never existed for itself, not once. It was the Tanka's mirror for the sky. Then it became Alfred Rennie's mirror for an industrial utopia that was little more than a colonial fantasy.
Right.
And finally became a mirror of Taiwan, which itself was acting as a mirror of a lost Chinese republic. It was a physical space composed entirely of reflections of things that were either far away, entirely gone, or never existed in the first place.
Think back to that very first indigenous name, Mirror Bay. It wasn't just a geographical description, it was a literal prophecy. Because a mirror only shows what is standing directly in front of it. And when that thing leaves, the mirror is completely empty. Today, the name Tiu Keng Leng is a perfectly empty shell. It's an artificial phrase meaning adjusting scenery that sounds suspiciously like a suicide, covering up a massive Canadian bankruptcy, sitting right on top of a sacred indigenous mirror.
The history of its names is literally the history of its erasure. Every new title was just an attempt to pave over the trauma of the previous one.
Which leaves you with something to really mull over. Geography isn't just dirt and rock, it's the ultimate record of who held power and who was forced to disappear. When you look at the map of your own city today, what forgotten reflections are hiding behind the names of the streets you walk every day? What was erased so that your neighborhood could exist? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.